Welcome to New to HR. It's great to have you with us all. My name is Nicole Lemaire and I'm the CEO of New to HR and our online community. Before we begin with this exciting webinar, here's some information. On the right-hand side, you'll see an area where you can ask questions to both Andy Swan and myself and inform me if there's any technical difficulties. I also like to welcome now Andy Swan, our speaker for Ripping Up the Rulebook webinar. Andy Swan, founder and head of ideas and mistakes of my amazing team, is undertaking a very interesting new project, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So thank you very much, Andy, for being here with us, and I'm sure you'll be amazed at what will come up in the next 20 to 40 minutes. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. It's really good to be here. I'm really excited to be joining. Brilliant. Well, I hope everybody can hear me. I'm not sure whether I'm showing up on screen at the moment, but fingers crossed. I have something to kind of wave in front of the screen as I go. But I'll make a start. So today we're going to be talking about ripping up the rulebook with the subtitle, let's focus less on the paperwork and more on the people. As Nicole's kindly mentioned, my name's Andy. Before we start, I'd just like to raise one question. So without people, what does an organisation have? And my premise is that nothing at all. Without people, an organisation is nothing. So yeah, so it's really great to be speaking with you all today. Firstly, again, I'd like to thank Nicole and New to HR for inviting me to speak. It's a real pleasure for me. I have no idea of the split out there amongst the attendees and people watching. So how many of you are already working in HR? How many of you are just coming into the sector and are literally new to HR? But either way, what I'm hoping to do today is share something that gets you thinking. That's my aim, is to get you thinking. So I've put myself on screen rather than put together slides with bullet points, as a lot of what I believe in is based around the value of human connection, people, and I really believe in communication and conversation. So with that in mind, it seems a little ridiculous to hide away from you behind PowerPoint slides. So I'm going to hold up my little doodles as we go. So all of this takes me to my first point, which is a confession. I'm not an HR professional. That's full disclosure. Admittedly, I've worked with and alongside HR. I've been a recruiting manager and obviously a departmental manager in both the public and private sector. I've worked in recruiting. I've run my own business. And through a personal interest in work and workplace, I've been on a crazy journey that has led me to this point, to where I am now, and I'm hopefully able to share some insight with you and get you thinking. I'm currently on a one-man project exploring the concept of work. It would be great if you could take a look at my website, which is iamtheworkproject.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Andy Swan, Swan with 2 N's. So I'm convinced that we're moving into a world where more responsive human organisations built around people and trust are the norm. And actually, in fact, I'm determined to make it that way. So I believe in simplicity. I'm in the process of writing a book called The Dawn of Simple, Rise of the Human Organisation. And it's based on my theories, born of personal experience, opinion being a big word here, and also being involved with the amazing HR community that you can find on Twitter. If you are new to HR, I thoroughly recommend you spend some time on Twitter. I'm just holding up a card now with some of the names, Twitter handles of people I've been speaking with recently who I really rate, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are communities and people out there who are ridiculously generous in sharing thoughts and conversations on HR and talking about the future of HR and the future of work. And I'll just give a little plug now for a book that's recently come out, an ebook called Human Resource 2, This Time as Personnel, which Nicole has actually contributed a post to. So definitely check that out and download it for your Kindle. But as for me, I sit somewhere between HR, internal comms, and facilities. Facilities being the people who design the physical workplace, as opposed to the people who keep the space clean and keep it moving. And I think this gives me a unique vantage point, and I do have a very strong opinion. So that's enough of my disclaimer. You know who I am, and that kind of explains why I'm not one for reading off facts and case studies. I have no CIPD qualification, and I have no viewpoint learned via traditional means. My aim here, and in general life, is to stimulate conversation and a reaction from putting across a perspective. What I say could equally be seen as fiction as proven fact, but the ideas that I share are for you to use in a way that suits you. So you can pick them up and run with them, you can refute them, you can disprove them completely. For me, I'm happy if you just react. I'm deliberately controversial in places. I'm purposefully lacking in detail in others. And rather than me talk at you for an hour and just give you my viewpoint, what I want to do is provoke a reaction, or at least make you ask one of these three big questions which I live my life by, which are what, why, and how. As far as I'm concerned, they're the questions that get every answer. So my aim is to turn this into a conversation. I've never used this webinar platform before, but from what I can see, I'm hopeful that we can create a conversation where you guys ask me questions. So what I'm going to do now is speak for 20 to 30 minutes and then turn it open to you to ask questions, share your thoughts, give me some feedback, and most excitingly, potentially challenge me, and we'll work through those and take it from there. So here we go. For me, conversation is the future. It's how we'll evolve organisations. It's also how we'll evolve work. It's the tool that HR will use to gain its rightful place at the centre of every organisation. In fact, where ripping up the rulebook is concerned, that's a very good place to start. HR finding its voice, which is a hot topic everywhere. So the world of work is emerging. I'm not going to give you a history lesson, but most of you will be aware of the concept of Taylorism. If not, you can Google it. But from the days of Taylorism, the world of work wanted robots, but unfortunately, at that point in time, they didn't exist. So it put humans in their place, and it put them in uniforms, and it told them how to behave, what to do. It managed from the top by dictation, and it required any inkling of individuality and personality anyone had to be left at home. When you were at work, you were at work. Who you were as an individual, a person, your interest was something completely separate and different. So this created a need for a filing system, which is where personnel and latterly human resources came in and evolved from. So keeping records of identity, job, role, compliance, tasks, and performance, and making sure the workforce was as it should be, were the origins. And as time progressed, we got through, probably came to the 1990s, and at that point the world started to change. So culture in general became less formal in the Western world. And as we then in the 2000s started to move into the social media age, and through a time of economic recession more recently, work and people progressively changed. And we've reached this point where suddenly new generations have entered the workplace who expected to be able to have an opinion in the world. They're used to being connected and having a personal identity, and this is filtered back through all of us already in the workplace. And no more is everyone looking for a simple career progression in a job for life environment, beholden to a pay packet that gradually increases over time and covers our income. Some of us even wanted to start working from home, be flexible, and even think about redefining what work is. And that's the world we've come to live in now. So in this world, organisations are revolving, and those that aren't are failing, or they're starting to fail. Some are failing slowly, and they're propped up by token gestures and values created in the boardroom and put up on posters, nods to culture, and they're also supported by previously stashed cash hoards when the going was good, which will keep them going as zombie companies for a long time. Others have died instantly after failing to evolve. Blockbuster, Kodak, Woolworths, big names with traditional business models that have just fallen apart in the modern world. And in their wake are emerging organisations built around people and valuing individuals. And for me, these are the future. So a couple of days ago, I read a really excellent blog by Gemma Rucroft. That's her Twitter handle there, and I'd suggest you follow her. She's an excellent HR blogger. And Gemma was discussing how unacceptable it is that millions in the UK are paid minimum wage, and that a few organisations committing to paying the living wage, i.e. a wage you can actually survive on, was a newsworthy thing. So in Gemma's blog, she mentioned the idea that actually we should start forgetting flat organisations, holocracies, and quirky things like unlimited annual leave and flexible working, and other aspects of that I see as ripping up the rule book, and I'll go on to cover in a moment. Because you see these as frivolous diversions away from the serious issue of basic pay and conditions. And while she's absolutely right in one respect, it is 2014. With these things shouldn't be an issue. HR should certainly be focused on ensuring decent basic working standards for all of its people. But in the other respect, my opinion differs a little. And for me, that's where ripping up the rule book truly comes in. It's not a petulant thing. It's not anarchy for anarchy's sake. It's actually, how can we take HR apart and put it back together differently in a way that fits the modern world? So, in my perspective, an organisation evolved to focus on people first and built around them is a strong organisation. When that's implemented correctly, shared core values create an identity, an organisational personality, and a culture. And it's something that drives that organisation forward in so many ways. So looking after people, treating them fairly, and allowing them, encouraging them to thrive is a natural byproduct of that kind of organisation. And that for me is the simplicity of it. If we build people-focused organisations that prove how meritocracy or other collective approaches based on trust, ideas, input and individuality actually work, then those organisations will start to become the norm, because people will want to work for them, people will see that they work, and that will then perpetuate. And it's going to take time. But the organisations who treat their people badly, or even neutrally, or don't even treat them as people, just numbers, will die out, just like the dinosaurs that they actually are in the modern workplace. So for me, HR has the opportunity, and perhaps the responsibility, to take on the mantle and make that happen. So instead of being the guardians of the status quo, ticking bureaucratic boxes, putting paperwork in place, and making sure recruitment matrices are complete, contracts are signed, and all the other things that go to demonstrate best practice that prevents potential tribunal or discrimination claim, HR can be something more human than that. HR can drive the change and become the central force of the new people-focused organisations that are emerging. Now, there's always talk and frustration at how HR has no voice or a place at the boardroom table. So here, in my view, and in brief, is how we're going to go and get that place at the table and grab the attention. So let's start where we are now. Contracts, forms, records, job descriptions, they're all about control. They're all about the old way of work. They're about protecting the organisation against the individual, and also protecting the individual against the organisation. It's a relationship of mistrust, mutual mistrust, and it heralds back to the very just, at the time, unionised struggle for any kind of workers' rights. But we've moved on from that. We live in a modern world where if we start building organisations around shared values, celebrating individuality, and creating cultures built around mutual trust, then the paperwork, in the large part, becomes obsolete. We won't need to rely on paper when we can talk openly about everything without suspicion, without worry, and we have that trust in place. So my major phrase at the moment that I really like is something I call freedom within parameters, and that's my little diagram to describe it, and I can go through that later on. And I think it can be applied to anything. In fact, now we've torn up the definition of HR so far, This is the only thing we need to put it back together. There's not a single organisational issue or concern around people that I've found that this approach doesn't address in a better way than reams of policy and procedure. So I've played with it around recruitment and retention, approaches to learning and development, approaches to organisational development and change, approaches to how less people-oriented but organisation-oriented, how they manage performance, profitability. Even if you have to focus on the money side, it's all there. And so here's the crux of the matter. I'm going to put this pretty simply. We need to simplify everything and make HR the guardians of the people, not the peddlers of the paperwork. And you can quote me on that. So if we can remove the layers of bureaucracy that exist in organisations, we can reduce, for example, contracts of employment down to a single page. We can recruit to personality, aptitude and shared values. We should be able to summarise every organisational policy in 140 characters or less, because they should be clear. In truly people-focused organisations where values are shared and culture is strong, engagement means time spent on disciplinary, tribunal and similar protective or rights-based paper chases becomes hugely reduced. And I'm going to show you this. There's a company in London, and a very good company, and you come out of the lift and that's what you see. And in essence, that summarises their whole company. You could always base their whole company on that with nothing else. So what should HR do with all the time that they're reducing from the input they're no longer putting into the paper chase? Well, if the people-focused organisation is like a family, HR needs to become the parent, the guardian of that family, the glue that binds it together, the centrepiece. HR needs to become a communicator and a mediator with a voice. So instead of a rigid box-ticking function, let's make HR a people function, which is not only more productive, but more enjoyable for us as HR people as well. In my mind, the future is not about employees as human resources that are resources commoditized alongside other resources like stationery and software. The future is about recognizing these people as people, appreciating and embracing their ideas, and collectively galvanizing them to make the organization succeed, giving them ownership. It's more human, and it's more accessible, but most importantly, it's more fun. The thing is, though, it's up to you as HR professionals to make it happen. You can rip up the rule book, because unfortunately for us, no one else is going to do it. And it's not going to be easy. So your task is going to be to mix things up and make sure you don't shy away from the three major questions that I mentioned earlier. Just ask them everywhere. And a great place to start will be by building bridges. Because from what I've experienced, HR is traditionally an isolated, standalone function that gets referred to when other departments need it. But it shouldn't be that. What you need to do is go out as HR, as a department or as an individual, find your allies across the organisation. And I recommend starting first in the other functions that deal primarily with people. So from my perspective, from where I sit, that's notably internal communications and those responsible for creating the workplace. And then once you've built the bridges with them and you've got this solid people function, take that out and keep building those bridges across the entire organisation. And all of a sudden, you've got an organisation that looks to HR as a centrepiece. Because it really surprises me how little connectivity there is between these areas, these individual people-focused areas at the moment. But we need to stop protecting our own areas of the organisation and being precious about them. We need to open up and work out loud and embrace the input of the external departments. And we need to look on the benefit to the organisation as a whole. Look on the organisation as a human, a living, breathing animal that needs nurture, it needs nourishment, and it has many functions working together in unison just to make it work. Even these little things like building bridges, making connections with your internal comms colleagues, something like that, something that seems so small, that's ripping up the rule book because it isn't happening yet and it hasn't been encouraged to happen. So your opportunity as HR professionals is there and you have the potential. And it's your choice now as to what you do with it. So the questions you have Do you ride the status quo and disappear in a corporate machine, but work your way up the ladder towing the line the way HR has always been? Do you head straight to Silicon Roundabout and into the most progressive tech startup and walk around using the phrase super awesome like there's no tomorrow? Or do you do something in between? What if you take those progressive ideas and you gently chip away at the status quo, piece by piece, conversation by conversation? You start gradually ripping up that rulebook and you put it back together in a way that slowly and surely evolves your organisation into a modern, people-focused employer. But that question's for you. It's up to you to decide what you do with it. So now I've said my piece, what I'd really like to do, I've asked you a question, I'd like you to hit me with yours, and let's try and take this forward into some kind of a discussion. If you guys want to stick questions into the text there, the chat area, I'll work through them and we can see if we can get some interesting conversation going. I'm just going to endeavour to try and get into the chat area.
Okay, thank you so much, Andy. I do have a few questions that came in via email and also Twitter just now.
Okay,
so there are quite a few people on the other side watching with us.
Before we start, Nicole, I should just say I'm having trouble kind of reading things through the chat bar as well, so I may refer to you as the question master if that's okay.
That's no problem. From the public, I've had a question. You mentioned about people-focused organizations and the power and the control HR has. How long will it take to adapt or change, the traditional thinking of HR?
Well, that's a really interesting point, and there's a lot of conversation on that. I mean, and it all depends on where you are, because what you have at the moment, you have this trend for the fact that starting a business is easier, particularly with the way technology is now. So you've got a lot of the new companies and the new fast-growing companies, even companies that are now well established, like Facebook, Google, and the tech companies. There are others in the non-tech sector. They've grown around a single entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs with an idea, and they've grown their businesses outwards, bringing in people who share their values and their drive. So those companies have grown with a distinct personality, and their success is there for all to be seen. And they're examples of how this people-focused organisation with shared values and valuing people's individuality have staked their place in the world of work and are succeeding. But as I said, there are many companies out there, who don't even the smaller businesses as well. They don't even necessarily recognise these themes; they're not on their radar. Larger, older, established businesses that are kind of global conglomerates that are very slow to change. As I said, they're going to start struggling, and they'll start losing the war for talent over time as these other companies come through. But they have money to sustain themselves, and it's not until that kind of previously gained wealth has dried up that they'll really fail. So it may be a slow evolution. I read something the other day. Someone suggested this will take 100 years to get. But I think if HR takes the mantle up, it can get that central position and just start slowly, conversation by conversation, idea by idea, chipping away, then we can make that evolution as quick as it can be. But by no means is it going to be a straightforward thing. And there will be people, and I know there are people who listen to what I have to say about people-focused organisations and think it's kind of hippie kind of waffle, and that's fine as well. But for me, it's something I believe in, and I think we can make it happen, but it's not going to be quick.
Okay, thank you for that. I have quite a few questions. One from Bill. You mentioned about not being peddlers of paperwork, and there's a lot of software on the market, but a lot of HR people do not really get trained from a new to HR perspective in using all this software. Is the need for software really there? Bill asked. Is it necessary to move forward more towards the people-focused organization?
I mean, for me, we're so far ingrained. Oh, sorry, hi Bill, by the way. We're completely ingrained with technology now, and it's there. And when it works, and it works well, then let's use it. There's some fabulous things out there that can make organisations more connected and more conversant. Some of the chatter applications like Yammer and internal comms things, they make it possible for global organisations to talk and share things, and that gradually starts to cut down some of the lengthy process and the paperwork. And yes, in a more traditional kind of business sense, yes, there are electronic systems that can certainly make the paper chase a lot more straightforward, which is definitely a step towards a more efficient, more agile business, which is kind of part of the characteristics of the people-focused business. But I think for me, it's equally a shift in attitude towards that can come with this, towards a more conversational, human style of business. Not, this is your place in the hierarchy. You're not allowed to talk to this person. This person dictates what you do here. So yes, technology has a big part to play, because equally, by improving the communication with technology, you can start breaking down some of the organisational and cultural barriers there. But it's certainly only part of a much larger picture.
Great. Michelle asks, for those who are new to HR, how can they be progressive without being arrogant? That's a very interesting question.
That's a really good question. Hi, Michelle. I think that's a really good question. So the last three questions I posed, kind of in your choice at the end there, there was a choice. Do you kind of suck it up and stay in a corporate role and toe the line and just advance your career for your own personal circumstances and maybe not get the fulfillment from your role that you want or make the impact you want? Or do you go and seek a career only in one of these already progressive organisations that are set up as people focused? Or do you slowly and surely chip away a conversation at a time? I mean, my way of talking is I was purposely making a case at the extreme end, because it's the way to get the conversation moving around it. Now, if I was to walk into an organisation tomorrow and just bowl up to the director of HR and say, you've got it all wrong, go into the MD and say, actually, we've got to restructure this organisation, we've got to focus it around people, you need to recruit to your values, you need to change your recruitment process to personality-led recruitment, you need to throw all the paperwork in the bin, you need to simplify everything. You're right, they're just going to go, get out of here, you arrogant idiot. They're people as well, particularly people who've been working in roles for a long time, they take a lot of ownership and pride in where they've got to. So it is a change, and I think you can be progressive, but by slowly starting conversations on ideas and bringing those ideas in, and I think speaking up about those ideas, I think ripping up the rule book, I think maybe that's quite a strong adjective. Maybe what we're talking about is gently tearing up the rule book slowly, replacing it with something else in the library. But there's some amazing people out there doing this in a far less kind of confrontational way than I'm trying to put it here. I mean, going back to the people I suggested looking up on Twitter, seek out Perry Timms. His mantra is changing the world of work one conversation at a time, and it is that mentality of chipping away. And it's like I said about Gemma's blog. She was talking about let's get the basics right before we go to the extreme. And I think just adopting and driving for these kind of people-focused themes, maybe blogging about it, writing it, and sharing them with other people in your organisation, you can start to drip the themes in as you develop your HR career. And I know that these themes are starting to come in and be represented within the CIPD as well. So actually, the professional bodies you'll probably come into contact with will start, kind of having these on their agenda as well. So I think it's a sea change, and I think it's just a case of gently pushing rather than kind of going at things with a battering ram.
Okay, great. I'm definitely one of the ripping up the rule book within an organization and previously as well. I'm fully for that. I'm one of those special HR people, I think.
I should just clarify. It doesn't. If you do that, then it doesn't necessarily mean you're arrogant. It's a case of making your point and proving it, and sticking to your guns. By no means is it necessarily arrogant for you to kind of go all out because you believe in something passionately.
No, very true. I'm with you definitely on that one. I have another one from Dana from Lebanon. She has a question regarding the people-focused organizations, and now you see more and more the commercial HR type, and really how you made how you make a balance of that. I think that's yes, that's the question. How do you make a balance of being people-focused, commercial?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thanks for that question. That's a really good one. And I think this, for me, the people-focused organisation isn't just about HR. For me, HR plays a central role in it. Um, but actually, the people-focused organisation is how the organisation's built. It's how it's structured. It's the way it works. So I think as this evolves, the commercial side and the people-focused side of the organisation will be one and the same thing. However, for now, as we said in the previous question, I'm well aware of the idea that actually, yeah, it is a tug of war, and it's how do you maintain that commerciality while pushing for something. But actually, as you start kind of making links with internal communications and increasing conversation across the organisation, actually the benefits of conversation, working out loud, and how that can increase efficiency and change the way we connect as an organisation and increase the way that ideas can filter through the organisation and bring in a level of creativity and innovation that wasn't there before. As those themes start to kind of come through, I think that's the trade-off that will then make the people-focused into the commercial side of things. So it goes back to that, just gently bringing in those themes, to kind of get to that position where they are one and the same.
Great. Another question from Tommy. He seems to work in an old-fashioned type of business. He doesn't clarify, what industry, but he asks really about the engagement and the culture and how he can put his mark on that.
Oh, that's a really good question, and I think yeah, it's another good opportunity to say that actually these progressive people-focused organisations are by no means the norm. So if you're not working in one at the moment, you're not missing out, because actually they're what we're driving for is to make it so that this is the norm for everyone. But it's certainly by no means there yet at all. So for me, simplified human organisations are very much built around culture and shared values, but those things need to get onto the agenda. And I mean, there's a lot of debate as to how you go and do that. Things like employee engagement and values have been used as buzzwords. They've kind of entered the boardroom, but only as far as the board sitting down saying, oh, we need some company values, writing it down on a sheet of paper and sticking it on the wall or on everyone's name tag. But by no means is that then something that drives the behaviour or is bought into by everyone within that organisation, or drives who you recruit and how you recruit them. So yeah, I mean, how to implement a culture is, again, it's another chipping thing. I think, going back to the link with internal communications, actually uniting a workforce as one and enabling everyone to talk to each other, and then starting to bring in conversation about what do we stand for, what's our purpose collectively and individually, why do we come to work, what's this company doing, what's this organisation doing, how are we going to do it? And by whether those conversations come down from the top or just start to emerge and are then seen by the top tiers of the hierarchy, at least those conversations are starting to happen. And if the organisation then starts to take an interest in developing a culture, culture and engagement are one and the same thing. I think that if the culture's there, it means that the people are engaged. I think trying to forcibly engage employees around tasks, for me, that's not necessarily the way to go. For me, trying to establish a set of common values and goals is then the way to get the buy-in, which develops a culture, which an engagement becomes a byproduct. So again, yeah, unfortunately, it's another, just start to raise the conversations one at a time, and link with other people. There's some great people doing great things in the UK here. I don't know where Tommy was based, but in the UK, there's a great meetup called Culturists. They meet up in London regularly. There's actually a meeting in Brighton next week and one in London the week after. And there are people there from large global organisations, smaller organisations, who get together because they believe so passionately in driving organisational culture that they're willing to lose their jobs over it. So that's a really good forum for some great ideas. And again, go to Twitter. Just start to kind of network on Twitter, and you'll find there's some people doing amazing conversations. I mean, I've only been involved really in the kind of workplace conversations I have for 6 months or so, and at the time I had my theories and I started to think about them, but then all of a sudden I realised actually there are so many people out there with amazing ideas who are all kind of starting to come together, and whether they're from HR, internal comms, facilities, or just general workplace protagonists, actually there is this kind of conversation emerging, and I think being part of it is the way to then carry that back to your organisation.
A lot of insightful information, definitely, and I think he's mentioning it's very clear for him in terms of what you just mentioned.
I hope that helps. Obviously, if any answers I give, if anyone wants to pick up with me on any of this afterwards, please do reach out on Twitter, or if you head to my website, my email address is there. I'm more than happy to have a chat with them.
I will definitely share the information with you and with them, vice versa. A question for myself, really. You mentioned, HR might not have a voice or a seat at the table, and how does that kind of link up with ripping up the rule book? I had a seat at the table in various corporate jobs, but unfortunately I didn't want a seat at the table because it meant that I couldn't rip up the rule book.
Yeah.
How do you, because I know some new to HR tribe members having similar issues, how do you kind of deal with that?
Absolutely. Well, I think you've probably got more insight than me on this one, but I'll have a stab at that one. So yeah, it's a really interesting one. I mean, I think like I said, there's a lot of discussion about HR getting that seat at the table, but then there is that kind of discussion. Actually, what do you do when you get there? Because once you're at the table, it's all spreadsheets and analytics, and actually, what can HR then report? Particularly if we're saying, well, that human, more kind of cultural-based, less measurable things are the future. How do you then bring that to a table where they want a spreadsheet that says, I've done this, it's had this impact on the bottom line? So it's a really good question, and I think it's finding a way, and there are some people doing some really good stuff on kind of measurables and different data we can use, and how we use that data and how we communicate it. It's finding the data that you can then, once you've got that seat at the table, that you can then use to communicate themes that will rip up the rulebook, that will kind of show, actually, here's what we've done, here's the impact it's had, and here's how that translates to language you understand, which is in pounds and pence or currency. And it's certainly not an easy thing, and that's half the problem. You battle to get that seat at the table, as you know, Nicole, and once you're there, it's actually another battle to get HR kind of understood by the other people in the boardroom as an important function within the business, and demonstrate actually it is the people side of things that does have an impact. Because if you're looking at black and white sales figures, actually there are human beings behind those sales figures. So it may be that if we start to map things like morale, job satisfaction, and bring in a cultural aspect of how we measure performance, actually we can then translate that back to say, well, look, this department was low on morale but achieved these sales figures. Imagine if they were high on morale, where their productivity would go. I mean, this is all just ideas now, but it is that kind of that translation to kind of ripping up the rulebook and being progressive about HR, but in a context that relates back to something the rest of the people at that table understand.
I think what you just mentioned is definitely true, and I always appreciate other people's viewpoints on that, because I think that's what's missing at the moment in the HR really HR industry. Even with some of the institutes, is they may not always give the right operational and tactical input. It's wonderful to have that strategic seat at the table, but if you're not allowed to do anything outside of the rulebook, it becomes a lot more difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have another one from Sandra. You mentioned something about the freedom in parameters, and you had a lovely design drawn up. She just asked you to clarify, if you could, a little bit more. And as well, I think we'll take another 2-3 questions after this, okay. And then we leave it.
Perfect. So this is my drawing. I came up with this a while ago. So it's kind of a basic model. It was used when I was kind of looking at different aspects of company performance and how things happen. And I mean, I should probably say at this point, I'm quite an advocate of activity-based working as opposed to task-based working. So instead of focusing on necessarily profits and saying your target this month is $10,000 worth of gross profit, actually saying if you do this, this, and this, we know that will achieve the desired outcome for the organisation. So the idea being, so a good example to use for this diagram would be the idea of, and it's been in the news recently because Virgin have brought it in. So the idea of unlimited annual leave, and it's sometimes seen as quite a frivolous thing. It's sometimes seen as a hot topic because people think, oh, it could cause absolute chaos in the organisation, and how do we implement it? So say we're applying this to unlimited annual leave. So the parameter, so the freedom is the unlimited annual leave. You can do whatever, you can take as much annual leave as you want. So if you're looking at activity-based working, what we're saying the parameters are, because if everyone just started taking all the holiday they wanted, you could get to a point where no one was coming into work. So you need to apply some parameters, not necessarily rules, but you can say, so the approach I favour, and there are people who have slightly different ones, is 3 parameters. You can have all the annual leave you like, provided you have the time off approved by your line manager or your colleague who you share responsibility with. You have all your work up to date before you go away, and you have someone in place, someone agreed to cover your work while you're away. So that's not setting rules, that's not saying you can't go. It's basically saying if you're doing the activity that's expected of you in the workplace and it's not going to cause a major impact to the business, then you've got the freedom to go. It's a reward for you performing the activities that the business needs you to do, and that then means that the outcome will always be productivity will be maintained, profitability will be maintained, and obviously things like morale will be maintained as well. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Wonderful. She may come back a little bit more on
yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure that was the most eloquent explanation I've ever done of the diagram, but more than happy to talk it through with anyone.
That's wonderful. And Khaled asked a little bit more about your book, The Dawn of Simple. If you could tell us a little bit of what we can expect with that.
Yeah, sure. So it's partly a parody on business books and self-help books. So again, as with anything I do, it's kind of quite opinionated, and it could equally be seen as, you could take it as gospel fact, or you could take it as complete fiction. But much as anything, it's your own perception of the information there. So yeah, it contains things like the ideas in the freedom within parameters, and actually just the idea that actually what we've done, that work and business goes back. If you take all the layers of complexity we put on top of it, it goes back to, there was a point in time where as a human being, I needed something. Say I needed some milk, and you may have a cow, and I need some milk. If I like you and your milk's good, I'll trade you something for your milk, and that relationship will continue because we like each other and the product's good. So that is really the foundation that business and organisations are built on. It was a conversation and a relationship between two people who each have something the other needs. So over the years, as we went through industrialisation and then the modern world and accountability, we've just put layers and layers of complexity on top, and it's become someone's job to write policies, so they need to make an impact when they write a policy. So every year when it gets revised, instead of stripping some a bit more to it to show they've made an impact and had a legacy. And we've just got to this stage where everything has become so complex and so kind of inhuman, and now we're driving back to say, well, actually, we're people, we have an opinion, we don't just need to have an employee number and be stuck in a file. Our ideas can contribute to the organisation, and actually, if you start to build organisations around people where the key theme is trust, and from trust you have shared values, which forms a strong culture, which then maintains this idea of trust or perpetuates it, actually you can simplify everything right down. You can go back to, like I said, 140 characters of a policy. So something, I'm just trying to find the card that I held up. The card that I held up, it just says work hard and be nice to people. If you could almost summarize your whole company on that, and then what you then need to place around that, the frameworks you need to place around it, are so much more simple because everyone's bought into the central purpose, and attitude of the organisation. So yeah, it's kind of a discussion on those kind of themes.
That's wonderful. I'm very excited, and I know there's already been some reactions on the public side about it. So I think there's quite a bit of interest. But do let us know, and we'll share amongst this group as well.
Oh, thank you.
I think we're coming to pretty much the last question, and it's more about how you deal with the ripping up the rule book. If you're quite and how to say in a position that's already a little bit senior after it's been asked, so they've already kind of ripped up the rule book. But they're not 100% sure where they go from there. Any advice? So it's a little bit different to Michelle's question.
Yeah.
One person has already done it, kind of thing, and now deals with the outcome of it, positive or negative. It doesn't stay.
Absolutely, and I think there are people out there in that position. There are certainly. I'm just wondering whether I should name names. There are people who are really good examples of how they're questioning the status quo. And ripping up the rule book, but while maintaining a position at very well established and corporate traditional companies. I've spoken to a few people who say, I like to push, but within the bounds of my position, there's a limit to how far I can push, because at the end of the day, I want to keep my job. But on the other side, there are people, and some of them were on the list of Twitter handles that I held up at the start, that actually. They say exactly what they believe, and they'll blog about it and they'll write about it, and then they'll translate that back to their workplace in a way that suits the workplace. There is that kind of concession that not everything I say can be implemented, but in some cases, actually they're saying this is how it should be, and the organisation recognises that. So I think it is a conversational thing. It is a kind of once you've ripped up the rule book, you need the buy-in from the organisation. You need the organisation to come with you, because kind of ripping up the rule book for HR is ripping up the rule book for the organisation, and it's putting the organisation back together in a far more human way, and that is based around conversation. So it's an organisation-wide conversation to keep that on track. But there are some examples of great people doing that very well, out there.
Great, thank you. I'm very interesting to hear about those people, actually, from a personal but also from a business perspective, and I would love to share that on one of our blogs, actually. I think that would help quite a lot of people. I do want to thank you. I want to leave it with this. I think you've been gone through a lot of questions and been very patient with us all. I appreciate you being here, as well as all the people who are listening online and offline later on.
Absolutely. From my perspective, I'd like to thank you for inviting me, and I'd really like to thank everyone out there who's watched it and kind of put in some input. There's been some great questions there. It's really nice to hear that people have been really kind of thinking about the subject and asking questions. So thank you all so much, because that's been the main of it for me. And like I say, if anyone wants to follow up afterwards, I'm more than happy to keep the conversations going.
That's great. As mentioned, I will share all the information, as well as further information in terms of contact details, if you're happy to.
Absolutely.
And
so it's just my Twitter handle again. But
could you show it again, please?
I think they're too quick. At Andy Swan, ANDYSWANN is me on Twitter. And that's kind of where I do most of my conversing, but email's absolutely fine. LinkedIn as well. Anywhere we can have a conversation, I'm more than happy to have one.
That's wonderful, and Andy is a very online Twitterer, and you always see him in conversations with some of the other great Twitterers or tweeters. I'm always confused, but especially in different languages, it goes really funny. But I do want to thank you very much, Andy, and I appreciate all your insights. And do let us know about the book as well. I know a lot of listeners as well as readers would love to get involved with it. And so thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.